The world of the patriarchs was harsh. Survival was a daily struggle. Family ties were paramount. In this ancient world, lineage was everything. It dictated your place in society. It determined your inheritance. And for the patriarch Judah, the son of Jacob, it was a matter of legacy. Judah's story, as told in Genesis 38, is a tumultuous one. It is a tale of loss, deception, and ultimately, redemption. At its heart lies a scandal. This scandal would challenge the very foundations of patriarchal society. It would force us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, justice, and the consequences of our choices. The story unfolds against a backdrop of ancient customs and traditions. These customs, often harsh and unforgiving, governed every aspect of life. Marriage was not simply a union of two individuals. It was a strategic alliance that ensured the continuation of a family line. Children, especially sons, were highly prized. They were seen as a blessing from God, a sign of favor and prosperity. Judah, the man chosen by Jacob to lead his tribe, found himself grappling with personal tragedy and moral failings. His story is a stark reminder that even those in positions of power are not immune to the temptations of the flesh or the consequences of their actions. The death of his wife, the daughter of Shelah, cast a long shadow over Judah's life. Grief-stricken and alone, he made choices that would have far-reaching consequences. His sons, Onan, and Shelah, became pawns in a desperate attempt to secure his lineage. Each son, in turn, would meet an untimely end, leaving Judah's hopes seemingly dashed against the rocks of fate. The weight of his lineage, the responsibility to produce heirs, pressed heavily upon Judah's shoulders. In his grief and desperation, he failed to see the humanity of those around him, including his daughter-in-law, Tamar. Tamar, a young woman thrust into a world of uncertainty and patriarchal control, becomes a pivotal figure in this ancient drama. Widowed at a young age, she found herself trapped in a system that offered her little agency or hope for the future. Bound by the customs of levirate marriage, she was left at the mercy of her father-in-law's decisions. Yet Tamar was no mere victim. She was a woman of cunning and courage. Faced with injustice and the prospect of a bleak future, she took matters into her own hands. Her actions, though considered scandalous by the standards of the time, were driven by a profound sense of right and wrong. Tamar's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It is a reminder that even in the face of adversity, hope can flicker, and justice, though long delayed, can ultimately prevail. The weight of his father's favor rested heavily on Judah's shoulders. As the designated leader among his brothers, he carried the responsibility of guiding his family. However, the close confines of his kinship became stifling. A yearning for independence, a desire to forge his own path, began to stir within him. He set his sights on Adullam, a land inhabited by the Canaanites. It was a place foreign to his upbringing, a land where different gods were worshipped and different customs prevailed. It was here in the house of Hira, an Adullamite man, that Judah sought solace and a respite from the expectations that bound him. It was in this unfamiliar territory that Judah encountered Shua's daughter. Little is known about this Canaanite woman, her name lost to the sands of time. We are only told that Judah saw her, desired her, and took her as his wife. This union, a transgression against the strict marital customs of his own people, marked a turning point in Judah's life. It was a step into a new world, a world where he could rewrite his destiny. The birth of their first son, solidified this new chapter in Judah's life. Here was his heir, a symbol of his lineage taking root in foreign soil. The arrival of seemed to promise a bright future, a continuation of Judah's name and legacy. Following two more sons were born to Judah and his Canaanite wife, Onan and Shelah. The family grew, seemingly blessed by fortune, yet a shadow lurked beneath the surface of this burgeoning family. The scriptures tell us that Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord. What wickedness committed, we are not told. The text remains silent, leaving a void that allows for speculation but offers no definitive answers. The punishment, however, was swift and merciless. God took life, leaving Judah and his wife to grapple with the sudden loss of their firstborn son. The weight of continuing the family line now fell upon Onan, heir's younger brother. Bound by the ancient custom of levirate marriage, Onan was obligated to marry Tamar, his deceased brother's wife. The purpose of this union was not love or companionship, but solely to produce an heir for Er. A son born of this union would be considered Er's legal heir, ensuring the continuity of his name. However, Onan, aware of this custom and its implications, chose to defy it. He was unwilling to father a child that would not bear his own name. His actions, driven by selfishness and a disregard for both tradition and Tamar's plight, were a direct affront to God's plan. Tamar, twice widowed at a young age, found herself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The deaths of her husbands, shrouded in tragedy and divine judgment, left her branded with the stigma of ill fortune. In the eyes of society, she had become an outcast, a woman who brought misfortune upon those who dared to marry her. Judah, still grieving the loss of 2 sons, remained seemingly oblivious to Tamar's plight. He promised her to Shelah, his youngest son, once he came of age. It was a promise made not out of concern for Tamar's well-being, but out of a desire to safeguard his lineage. Tamar was left to wait, her future uncertain, her fate tied to the whims of a man consumed by his own grief and ambition. Days turned into months, and months stretched into years. Shelah grew, yet Judah hesitated, perhaps fearing that Tamar's supposed curse would claim his last remaining son. Tamar's existence became one of quiet desperation. Confined to the shadows of Judah's household, she was a constant reminder of his losses, a living embodiment of his family's misfortunes. Yet, beneath her grief and resignation, a spark of defiance began to flicker. Tamar, though bound by tradition and circumstance, possessed a strength that belied her delicate appearance. She would not be forgotten. She would not be discarded. The time for waiting was coming to an end. Onan, bound by custom but driven by self-interest, devised a plan. He would fulfill his duty to his brother, at least in appearance, but he would deny Tamar the one thing she desperately needed, a child to carry on Er's name. The scriptures tell us that whenever Onan lay with Tamar, he spilled his seed on the ground. This act, a blatant disregard for both tradition and God's will, was an affront to the very foundation of lineage and inheritance. Onan, in his arrogance, believed he could cheat both God and man. He sought to enjoy the pleasures of the flesh while shirking the responsibilities that came with it. But God saw through Onan's deceit. His actions, rooted in selfishness and a lack of compassion for Tamar, did not go unpunished. Like his older brother, Onan met an untimely end, struck down by the hand of God. His death, a stark reminder of the consequences of sin and disobedience, sent shockwaves through Judah's household. Judah, already reeling from the loss of his firstborn, was now faced with the death of his second son. The weight of these tragedies pressed down upon him, fueling his grief and perhaps a growing sense of guilt. His dream of a thriving lineage, of his name echoing through generations, seemed to be crumbling around him. Section 2. A Father's Fear. Shelah and the Shadow of Superstition. 2 sons gone, their lives cut short by the hand of God. A pall of fear and uncertainty settled over Judah's household. Whispers of curses and ill omens followed Tamar, the young widow who had buried 2 husbands. Was she cursed, as some suggested? Did she bring misfortune upon those who dared to marry her? Judah, grappling with his own grief and the weight of societal expectations, found himself torn. He had promised Tamar to his youngest son, Shelah, once he came of age. It was a promise made out of duty, a desperate attempt to salvage his lineage. But now, fear gnawed at his heart. Could he risk losing his last remaining son to the same fate that befell his brothers? Superstition whispered in his ear, urging him to keep Shelah away from Tamar, to protect him from the shadow that seemed to follow her. And so Judah hesitated. He made excuses, delaying the fulfillment of his promise. He told Tamar to return to her father's house, to wait for Shelah to mature. In his heart, however, he knew he might never be ready to surrender his last son to the uncertainties that seemed to surround Tamar. Section 3. Tamar's Resolve. A seed of defiance takes root. Years passed. Tamar, still young but with the weight of experience heavy upon her shoulders, waited in her father's house. She had known loss, had tasted the bitterness of widowhood twice over. She had been promised security, a future as Shelah's wife, only to have that promise dangled before her, always just out of reach. Resignation could have easily consumed her. She could have accepted her fate as an outcast, a woman cursed by circumstance. But beneath her quiet demeanor, a spark of defiance flickered. Tamar, though bound by tradition and the whims of a man who held her future in his hands, possessed a strength that belied her delicate appearance. She observed Judah. She saw his fear, his reluctance to fulfill his promise. She saw how he clung to Shelah, shielding him from the supposed curse that surrounded her. And in her heart, a plan began to take shape. Tamar would not be forgotten. She would not be cast aside. She would claim what was rightfully hers, even if it meant challenging the very foundations of patriarchal society. The time for waiting was over. The time for action had arrived. Section 1. The Road to Timnah, Tamar's Daring Deception. Word reached Tamar that Judah, still mourning the loss of his wife, was making his way to Timnah for the annual sheep shearing. This, she knew, was her opportunity. She had waited years for Judah to honor his promise, to give her to Shelah as his wife. But the years had brought nothing but hollow assurances and a growing sense of her own powerlessness. Tamar, however, would no longer be a passive observer in her own destiny. She would seize control, even if it meant resorting to unconventional, even scandalous means. She exchanged her widow's garb for the attire of a prostitute, a veil concealing her face, her true identity masked beneath a cloak of anonymity. This transformation, a daring act of defiance against societal norms, was not driven by a desire for personal gain or a thirst for revenge. It was a calculated risk, a desperate gamble to secure what she believed was rightfully hers. A place within Judah's family, a son to carry on the lineage that had been denied to her. Tamar positioned herself at the crossroads near Timnah, a place called Enaim, where she knew Judah would pass. She waited, her heart pounding beneath her disguise, a silent predator lying in wait for her prey. As Judah approached, she saw in him not a father-in-law, but a man blinded by grief, consumed by his own desires, and oblivious to the woman standing before him. Section 2. The Exchange, a widow's wiles and a patriarch's lust. Judah, his heart heavy with sorrow, noticed the veiled figure sitting by the roadside. He saw in her not a daughter-in-law, but a woman of pleasure, a temporary distraction from the burdens that weighed him down. He approached her, his intentions clear, his judgment clouded by grief and a longing for solace. Tamar, playing the role she had crafted for herself, engaged in a calculated dance of seduction. She spoke to Judah in veiled words, her true identity hidden behind a mask of anonymity. She knew his weaknesses, his desperation to perpetuate his lineage, his vulnerability in the face of temptation. "What will you give me?" she asked, her voice a husky whisper beneath the veil. It was a question designed not to extort but to test, to gauge the depth of Judah's desire, his willingness to pay any price for a fleeting moment of pleasure. Judah, blinded by his own needs, readily agreed to her terms. He promised her a young goat from his flock, a payment for her services. He did not recognize her, did not see past the veil she had so carefully constructed. He saw only what he wanted to see, a means to escape his grief, a vessel for his desires. Section 3. The Pledge and the Promise, Seeds of Doubt and Deception. Tamar, ever cautious, demanded a pledge, a guarantee that Judah would honor his promise. "Give me something as a pledge," she insisted, "until you send it." Her request, seemingly driven by the pragmatism of a woman accustomed to dealing with unreliable men, held a deeper significance. Judah, eager to consummate the encounter, readily agreed. He offered her his seal, its cord, and the staff in his hand, items of significant personal value, symbols of his authority and identity. He surrendered them willingly, blinded by lust and a need for gratification that overrode any sense of caution. As Judah lay with Tamar, he believed he was simply satisfying a physical urge, finding momentary solace in the arms of a stranger. He remained oblivious to the web of deception that surrounded him, unaware that he was playing a role in a drama far more complex than he could have imagined. Tamar, her part in this carefully orchestrated encounter complete, slipped away as silently as she had come. She shed her disguise, exchanging the attire of a prostitute for the familiar garb of a widow. She returned to her father's house, carrying within her not only the weight of Judah's deception, but also the seed of his redemption, a secret that would soon shatter the fragile facade of his carefully constructed world. Section 1. Whispers of Scandal and the Shadow of Judgment. Time marched on, measured not in days or weeks, but in the slow, burgeoning growth of life within Tamar's womb. The secret she carried, a dangerous truth hidden beneath her widow's garments, became a ticking time bomb, set to explode with the undeniable evidence of her condition. Whispers of Tamar's supposed indiscretions, fueled by speculation and the venomous gossip that often plagued those living on the margins of society, eventually reached Judah's ears. He, still blind to his own transgression, reacted not with compassion, but with righteous anger. The weight of his son's deaths, the fear that Tamar was cursed, that she brought misfortune upon those connected to her, ignited a fury within him. He demanded justice, his voice booming with the authority of a patriarch scorned. "Bring her out," he ordered, his face contorted with a mix of rage and disgust, "and have her burned to death." The punishment for Tamar's perceived transgression was to be swift and brutal, a public spectacle designed to cleanse his family of the shame she had brought upon them. The irony of the situation, the cruel twist of fate that placed him as judge and jury over a woman he had wronged, seemed lost on Judah. He who had sought pleasure in the arms of a stranger, who had broken the very laws he now sought to uphold, remained oblivious to the depth of his own hypocrisy. Tamar, facing her accusers, her life hanging precariously in the balance, knew that silence meant certain death. She had played a dangerous game, had challenged the very foundations of patriarchal society, and now the consequences of her actions were bearing down upon her. Yet she did not crumble. She did not beg for mercy. Instead, she chose to confront her accuser, to unveil the truth that Judah, in his self-righteous fury, had failed to see. As she was being led away, condemned by the very man who had impregnated her, Tamar made a final desperate plea. "I am pregnant," she declared, her voice echoing through the stunned silence by the man who owns these. Her words, sharp and unwavering, pierced through the veil of Judah's self-deception, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions. She presented the items Judah had so carelessly surrendered as a pledge: the seal, the cord, and the staff. These objects, imbued with his identity and authority, became the instruments of his reckoning. They stood as silent witnesses to his transgression, a tangible reminder of the night he had spent with a woman he believed to be a prostitute, a woman he now condemned to death. The crowd gasped, their whispers like a buzzing swarm, as the weight of Tamar's accusations sank in. Judah, his face draining of color, stared at the objects in Tamar's hand, recognition dawning in his eyes. The seal, engraved with his family emblem, the cord he himself had tied, the staff he always carried. There could be no denying the truth. The silence that followed Tamar's revelation was deafening. Judah, confronted with the undeniable evidence of his own hypocrisy, felt the full weight of his actions crashing down upon him. The carefully constructed walls of denial and self-righteousness he had erected around himself crumbled, leaving him exposed, his sins laid bare for all to see. He looked at Tamar, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. He saw not a seductress, not a temptress who had lured him into sin, but a woman he had wronged, a woman who had shown more courage and integrity than he had. In that moment of reckoning, Judah found his voice, not to condemn, but to confess. "She is more righteous than I," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper, heavy with shame and regret, "since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." With these words, Judah acknowledged not only his transgression, but also Tamar's righteousness. He recognized that his fear, his unwillingness to fulfill his promise, had driven her to such desperate measures. The crowd, accustomed to the pronouncements of their patriarch, watched in stunned silence as Judah, stripped of his arrogance and authority, accepted responsibility for his actions. The flames of judgment that he had so eagerly sought to ignite against Tamar now turned inward, consuming him with the searing heat of his own guilt and remorse. Tamar's pregnancy, a source of such scandal and condemnation, culminated in the birth of twins, Perez and Zerah. The circumstances of their arrival, steeped in deception and a defiance of societal norms, seemed to foreshadow a life of controversy and struggle. Yet these twin boys, born from an act that challenged the very foundations of patriarchal society, would go on to play a pivotal role in the unfolding drama of Israel's history. Perez, whose name means bursting forth, became the ancestor of King David, the shepherd king who united the tribes of Israel and established a dynasty that would endure for centuries. From David's line would come the Messiah, the promised one who would bring salvation to the world. The birth of Perez and Zerah marked a turning point in Judah's life. It was a stark reminder that God's plans often unfold in ways we least expect, that even our most misguided actions can be redeemed by a power far greater than ourselves. Judah, humbled by Tamar's righteous deception, emerged from the crucible of scandal a changed man. He acknowledged his failings, accepted responsibility for his actions, and perhaps most importantly, recognized the strength and wisdom of a woman he had underestimated. The story of Judah and Tamar, though rooted in the ancient world of patriarchs and tribal customs, continues to resonate with readers thousands of years later. It is a tale that transcends time and culture, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, justice, and the often blurred lines between right and wrong. Tamar's actions, though considered scandalous by the standards of her time, can be interpreted as a courageous act of defiance against a system that offered her little agency or hope for the future. She was a woman trapped by circumstance, bound by the dictates of a patriarchal society that often silenced and marginalized women. Judah, the patriarch, the chosen leader of his tribe, emerges as a flawed and deeply human character. He is consumed by grief, blinded by his own desires, and ultimately humbled by the consequences of his actions. His journey is a reminder that even those in positions of power are not immune to the temptations of the flesh or the corrosive effects of pride and self-deception. The story of Judah and Tamar is not a tale of easy answers or clear-cut moral judgments. It is a story that invites us to wrestle with complex questions, to confront our own biases, and to consider the perspectives of those who have been marginalized and silenced throughout history. It is a story that reminds us that justice, though often delayed, has a way of finding its way into the light, even if it arrives through unconventional and sometimes scandalous means.